and North East Derbyshire area. The result is that there are a lot of people in those villages, more than 100 people affected by the HS2. I want to know as soon as possible just exactly what is going to happen to this £100 billion project, because it goes through Derbyshire on 2 separate lines. Not only does it go past Sheffield, it also stops at the Sheffield station. And so there is a slow track and a fast track in Derbyshire. The idea that the HS2 is based upon getting to London 30 minutes sooner is a joke. And for that reason, he should start over again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Look, I know that the honourable gentleman's constituency is affected in a big way, and I refer to what I said before. This project affects a lot of people's lives, the demolitions and the rest of it in his patch. He asked me to do this as soon as possible. I have got Douglas Oakerby on an unbelievable timetable, supported by a fantastic group of people, to get this done and reported back this autumn. He will not have to wait before the end of the year.
Maggie through.
Speaker,
to take powers. In order to take powers, we need to legislate, and in order to legislate, this House needs to be sitting. Is it not clear, Mr. Speaker, that if this House does not get the legislation through because it is prorogued or dissolved by the end of October, that the rights of the people of Northern Ireland will be detrimentally affected?
Well, I think, again, the priority has to be on getting Stormont up and running. I've been honest
on the UK food and drink industry. Is that scaremongering? The British Medical Association has said in their report dangers of a no deal could lead to the disintegration of the NHS. The fashion industry, worth £32 billion, said no deal should be avoided. The Incorporated Society of Musicians said no deal Brexit will incur major disruption to the music industry, worth £4.5 billion. Are they scaremongering? Guy Verhofstadt, coordinator for EU Brexit, said the only people who will prosper are the wealthy bankers and hedge fund managers who have bet on chaos. I think the Leader of the House also owes an apology to Dr. David Nicholl. He was part of the Operation Yellowhammer. When will the Leader of the House publish Operation Yellowhammer? Or does he think the government is scaremongering? Mr. Speaker, they're like the wolves of Whitehall. They're marauding over our customs and our conventions. It's absolutely outrageous the way they are destroying them. And actually, the Prime Minister only governs by custom and convention. I think the Leader of the House also owes an apology to Mr. Speaker. I think he was heard on air to say that Mr. Speaker was wrong. But I want to remind him of his bedtime reading, Erskine May, of the dedication that is compiled by some of the officials, both past and present. And it says this: the Speaker of the Commons and in the Lords and all the Commonwealth speakers, on whom fall the great responsibilities of guardianship of the parliamentary system. We saw that this week, and we thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me deal with the last point first, because I would not have dreamt of saying that you were wrong. I made the point, the classic point, that you have not eyes to see with nor lips to speak except as directed by this House. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that that is what you do properly, and you have consistently taken the view that the House should be able to debate what it wishes to debate, though I will confess that sometimes, if I were in your position, I might come to a different decision. That is not in any sense disrespectful.
I'm to hear reports that the Leader of the House has in the past suggested that all council workers should wear bowler hats, that Somerset should have its own time zone, that he has apparently met a group favouring voluntary repatriation of black immigrants and has disputed climate change. Mr. Speaker, does he still believe these things, or has he finally decided to live on planet Earth?
The Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the first half of that question referred to jokes, and the second half of that question is wrong.
Thank you. Parliamentary.
Speaker, Medway Hospital Radio has raised a real concern about hospital radios being able to get appropriate licensing from Ofcom, preventing patients from getting access to radios in hospital. That can't be right. Can we have an urgent statement or a debate on that, please, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hospital radio is very important to cheer people up in hospital, and actually is a very good training ground for people. Entirely suitable subject, though this is, of course, at your discretion for an adjournment debate.
Alan Brown.
Speaker, in January 2019, the High Court ruled it's illegal for the DWP to make universal credit deductions to people who receive two pays within the payment assessment period. When is the government going to make changes to comply with the law?
Her Majesty's Government always complies with the rule of law. It is a fundamental principle of our Constitution.
Fiona Burries.
The Charity Commission has asked abortion provider Murray Stokes
for hour after hour in a very diligent way, and I think if Mr. Speaker were paid on an hourly rate, he'd find he was getting less than if he worked at McDonald's. It is very impressive. But I'm telling you, the honourable gentleman, the member for the Rhondda, will have to catch your eye in due course before we run out of time. But I share my honourable friend's concern. It is a matter for the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, but charities must report on the number of staff.
5 houses burnt, 3 Christians killed, a father and a son of 7-year-old and an elder of the church, brutally beheaded. We had a debate in the chamber here back some 6 weeks ago, where we discussed the persecution of Christians and the Tour report. Could I ask the Leader of the House, could we have an update on where we are? Because the murders of Christians is continuing across the world.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very serious issue, and I share his concern for the persecution of Christians across the world, and we should do whatever we can, and indeed the government is doing what it can to help them. I believe the honourable gentleman met my predecessor quite recently to discuss the matter of freedom of religion and belief, and I know he is in regular communication with the Prime Minister's Special Envoy in freedom of religion or belief at the Foreign Office. These incidents are dreadful, and we must do everything we can.
The chair of the Science and Technology Committee, of course, is Sir Norman Lamb.
Kind, Mr. Speaker, and I rise to make a statement following the publication by my committee, the Science and Technology Select Committee, of our report last month on clean growth and technologies for meeting emissions reduction targets. And I should say, incidentally, that these technologies are essential to confront the climate emergency that we face. I want to start by thanking over 80 organisations and individuals who have provided us with written evidence, and the 27 individuals who gave evidence. Barely changed since 2012, and this is now the heaviest emitting sector of the UK economy, and indeed emissions from new cars appear to be actually going up. In the near term, the government should be using vehicle excise duty to incentivise the purchase of lower emitting models and work to make electric vehicle charge points much more widely available and interoperable. In the longer term, the government should bring forward its proposed ban on sales of new conventional cars and vans to 2035 at the latest, and should also move towards a future transport system that no longer requires widespread ownership of cars. This is not, incidentally, an imposition on people not to have cars, but there needs to be a national discussion about what our future transport system will look like and how we can get up to set out in this report.
Dr. Alan White.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. May I warmly welcome this Select Committee report and congratulate the Chair of the committee and indeed the members of the committee on the assiduity with which they've gone about their business and the comprehensive and compelling report that they have produced as a result. As a result of the decision by this House to change the targets on greenhouse gas removal from 80% by 2050 to net zero by 2050, it is clear that a number of the actions that had previously been proposed based on the carbon budgets and indeed government ambition
The proceeding will start shortly. Proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly. The proceeding will start shortly.
Laws and regulations, or is it in dynamic alignment where it is taking rules and regulations from the Commission over which we would have no vote? And they may huff and puff. What that suggests, Mr. Speaker, is actually they want this Parliament to continue to take rules from the Commission, but in the future to have no say over those rules. So we do want a situation where you have two sovereign states, but it's not on the basis of deregulation, it's about sovereignty.
EU citizens is now for member states to reciprocate.
Oh, very well. Ruth George.
Thank you. What assessment has the government made of the impact on people with pre-existing health conditions who no longer can use the European health insurance cards to cover their conditions if they either now live in the EU or are travelling?
Minister.
Well, this will depend on decisions and arrangements with individual companies, and I would encourage them to reciprocate.